I've had this Rock River Arms AR15, little carbine, 16-inch barrel, for about 4 years now. And about a year after I'd originally bought it, I got myself a scope for it. It was a pretty inexpensive Osprey 4-16 by 50 millimeter Mil-Dot scope. And I really liked it, except that it had one major problem with it. After tinkering with it for a while, I figured out that the reticle was canted inside the tube. Not cool. And I guess that's something that a lot of people have reported on with some of the Chinese-made scopes like Osprey and others. I sent that scope back and I got my money back for it, but I really wanted something that could take its place, something that would kind of fit into the roles that I had. And really what I use the scope for on an AR15 is for prone shooting, longer distance shooting, like anything past 300 yards. I use it for varminting, so when I go prairie dog hunting, sometimes I bring the AR out and it does a pretty good job out there. Not as good as my bolt rifle, but it's still really fun. And some of the things that were kind of non-negotiable on this, I definitely wanted a side focus. I was really looking for a first focal plane reticle, and I wanted something that was as much Milliradian as possible. I wanted, at least some kind of Mil-Dot or Mil-Hash reticle in there. And as far as other preferences on this scope, I was looking for something in the range of a 2.5 to 10 power variable scope. I wanted something that was less than 20 ounces. If it had full mil adjustments for windage and elevation, that would be really nice. If it had an illuminated reticle, fine. I pretty much do all my shooting during the day, and for prairie dogs, they're down before the sun goes down, so it's not like I have a problem with light or seeing the reticle, but I just thought it'd be a nice little touch. A 30 millimeter tube, I wanted that, just to have something that's a little bit stronger than the 1-inchers, and I was hoping for something that would be less than about $400, and all of that is a recipe for something that doesn't quite exist. That's a pretty tall order. But I put together a little comparison chart, and I was looking at Leopolds, I was looking at Bushnells, Vortex, Night Force, Valdata, US Optics, and Premier reticles. And of course, all that stuff, especially as you start getting into those later ones I mentioned, you don't get anything for, gosh, less than $1,500. If you're going US Optics, I don't think they make anything less than $2,000. So those were kind of out. As far as price went, I was pretty happy with some of the price tags on the Bushnells, Vortex, Millets, and Weavers. But then I went to SWFA's website and I saw that they had this scope listed. It was called a Falcon. I'd heard of Hawk before from Britain, but I hadn't heard of Falcon. And so I checked this thing out, looked at it there. I saw a review on Sniper Central, and the guy that had it, he realized that it was a pretty inexpensive thing, but he really liked it. So after taking a look, I decided to go with it. And this is, right here, this is the Falcon Menace 4-14 by 44 millimeter. This has the illuminated reticle. And here's the little rheostat for that. It's all Milliradian, everything. It's a Mil-Hash reticle. It has Milliradian turrets, both elevation and windage. Each of the graduations on this turret, you can kind of see that each of the little notches there, that's 0.1 milliradians. All the way around is a full 6 milliradians. You can see that it tells you which direction you're twisting, up or down, and then it has little hash marks that can let you know how many rotations you've done. Now in total on elevation, you can get 26 milliradians of elevation shift, and that's really darn cool. On this particular rifle for my particular use, I'm not going to be stretching anything out that far or moving any bullets that slow that's going to really come into play. But it is nice to know that if I move this over to another rifle, maybe for some longer range work, I have 26 milliradians to work with. That's not bad. That gets me out well past 1,000 yards. I really didn't want an adjustable objective. I wanted the side focus, because if you're laying down, going prone, taking shots, and this isn't a bench rest situation, then it's just a pain to have to reach up and try to twist the objective and figure out where you're supposed to be. I much prefer to just be able to reach up right in front of me, grab the dial, and then get my parallax fixed. The reticle is an illuminated, what Falcon calls the B20 reticle. It's a 1/2 mil hash, both on elevation and on windage, and you get a little bit more elevation down at the bottom. You get 10 mils below kind of the 0 point, and off on the sides you get 5 on each side and then 5 up above. And that's pretty slick, because really you're going to encounter more drop than you will anything else. So it's really nice to be able to adjust without having to mess with the turrets. You can go ahead and make changes out to, you know, even for my little 223 here, I could make adjustments without adjusting the turrets up to, oh gosh, probably out about 900 yards. One aspect that's kind of a miss on my little wish list when I bought this scope, I was looking for something that was under 20 ounces, and really once you start getting into, you know, a 30 millimeter tube and you get all this junk attached to it like I wanted, there really isn't, I don't think there really is anything below 20 ounces. There might be some in the Vortex line, maybe on Bushnell, but if you look up the weights of like a Night Force, a US Optics, Premier Reticle, Schmidt & Bender, those things weigh a ton. They can be up past 30 ounces. This one right here is 26.5 ounces. So it's definitely heavier than what I was shooting for, but I'm all right with it, because for me, my use of this thing is going to be if I'm shooting prone, if I'm on a bench, you know, if I'm somehow propped up on something to take a shot. I don't anticipate standing and taking shots with this thing, because really it's just, it's not very bearable. It's heavy. I'm okay with the weight of this scope, just because I already have some other items that fit the lighter bill. If I'm dealing with more close quarter type of shooting, you know, I have a red dot sight. I have the iron sights, of course, the backup iron sights, which I'm pretty decent at. You know, I can take shots out at 600 yards with those things, and yeah, I can usually be pretty accurate with them. In fact, I'm usually better with the iron sights than I am with the red dot. So having this much weight, you know, for me is fine. It's something that I can quickly pop off the rifle and stow away, and you know, for me, I'll be laying down when I use this thing, or I'll be on a bench, or I'll be propped up on a rock or something, and that's just fine for me. As far as other features go, this was not billed as having fully multi-coated optics. You know, they talked about having coatings on it or whatever, but I don't believe that this is fully multi-coated. I've done some of the tests where you shine a white light down inside the tube and see if you get any full color reflections back, and I did. So I'm assuming that this is not fully multi-coated, and that's okay for the price point. Yeah, that's all right. I have a lot of the features that I was looking for, and really the clarity is pretty darn good, so I'm not too concerned about it. As far as accessories go, I have everything that came with it either attached to it right now. I have one of the, well, it came with 2 sunshades. I have one on right now. It came with these little cheap flip-up caps. It also came with a polishing cloth for the lens, and I have that. It also came with a battery, of course, for the illuminated reticle. And right now I have that stuff all tucked down here in the grip, my little Mako grip here. It has a little cap down at the bottom you can pop off. So I have some goodies in there. I have some extra batteries and the polishing cloth, a couple other little tools. Now, as far as some of the weird optical qualities are concerned, I'm just going to go through a little list, and I might be able to illustrate some of these in pictures. Some of them are pretty difficult to actually show, but I'll at least go through my observations of these things. Some of these are just standard lens tests, things that you would do to a camera lens to determine its quality, and so I'm just going to list off what I found. Let's go through the image quality. The field of view is 7.9 feet at 14x at 100 yards, and that seems to be pretty standard across the board. Pretty much everything in that zoom range is going to have the same field of view, so no big deal there. The resolution is actually pretty darn good. I used a chart that is set up specifically. It has lines of increasing complexity. And if you can still continue to see those lines as they get smaller and smaller on the page at a fixed distance, then that's a good indication of how good your resolution is. And really, it was quite impressive. The optics, the actual glass on this thing, supposedly comes from Japan. The components are made in China, and everything's put together in Great Britain. So it's kind of an amalgam. Let's just call it an international scope. But the glass that comes from Japan, as far as I can tell, is very good. The contrast was quite good. Again, I used another little chart test on that. And spherical aberration was almost imperceptible. There's just a little bit. As you get out toward the edges, you can start to see some things bend just a little bit. Chromatic aberration actually is, and this might be part of the problem with it not being fully multi-coated, chromatic aberration does show up. If you get into high contrast situations where you have a dark background, a light object, or a light background like just the sky today, and then a black object, you really do get some yellow, green, you get highlights depending on how your focus is at the time. Mostly I saw yellow and blue separation, and it was off-center, kind of at a diagonal, which kind of leads to some of the other distortion that you get. There is a little bit of an astigmatism, not bad. If there is one, it's almost imperceptible. It's actually quite good. Barrel distortion, there's just a tiny little amount. Rolling distortion, none of that. Brightness, I don't have a real test for that. I imagine it's not going to be as good as a Premier Reticles or a US Optics or anything like that. It's just going to be better glass there. I would expect to have more light transmission, but I really can't complain. You know, out here, I've shot on cloudy days, sunny days. It all seems to be good. The bokeh is a little bit, it's not perfect. It's quite good. From the center out to the edges, everything's kind of smooth, but you suddenly get a dark ring toward the edge, followed by a bright ring. So you get kind of a bright yellowish edge, and then things get a little darker, and then really in toward the middle, things lighten up and get really smooth. So for the functional area of the scope, the bokeh is quite nice. Alright, so let's take a look at some of the controls here. At the front we have the eyepiece focus ring, which it turns very nicely and it works well. I was able to get mine dialed in just the way I like. The only thing that I would have really liked on this is a locking ring, so that I can lock this thing in place. As it is, it spins just a little too easily, and if I'm not careful putting on the turret, or excuse me, the flip-up cap, then sometimes I can spin that thing, and that would kind of ruin my focus just a little bit. Not a huge complaint, but it's just something to think about. Next up, we have the brightness dial, brightness and color for the reticle, and it's pretty straightforward. It does have some problems. I didn't notice it at first, but lately when I've been trying to change the brightness of this thing, it kind of flickers and goes weird. It doesn't smoothly go from one brightness level to another. That could just be a battery issue. I'll try that. The zoom ring right up here goes from 4 to 14, and I will say one thing about every one of these little dials, turrets, whatever, with the exception of the front eyepiece here, everything has been really stiff to turn at first. They're starting to loosen up just a little bit, but not much. I mean, really, this thing is just very stiff to work with. So yeah, it's a 4-14, and it has a nice kind of rubber knurled ring there that you can spin around. If it were just a little bit easier to turn, that would be nice, but it's all right. The side focus, like I was saying, all of these knobs have been difficult to turn. This has no graduations on it at all. It has no indication of, you know, sometimes they'll indicate yardage where they think the focus is. And I don't miss it. I really don't care that it doesn't tell me, okay, this is 500 yards, this is whatever, because I'm not using this as a rangefinder or anything like that. I'm just rolling until I get in focus, and I'm using the reticle for any range-finding abilities. Elevation and windage turrets are almost exactly the same. They seem to be quite right on from the factory. I didn't have to change much stuff. Now I do have to readjust the turrets. The first time I took it out to get this thing zeroed, it was a little windy and I was trying to guess at how much wind I was getting. I'm off a little bit, so I need to bring this thing back by 0.5 milliradians, and then this one I think I'm off by about 0.3. So I'll take that home tonight, and I'll get those things, the caps, turned back around so that I know where my actual zero is. You're not going to hear much about Falcon Menace because they don't have a big presence in the US. They seem to sell more stuff in Great Britain, New Zealand, other countries like that. So you're not going to hear all that much, you know, even on the web actually. But one thing that you're going to find with anybody that has owned this is they complain about the mushiness of the turrets, and I can back this one up entirely. You can't hear the clicks unless you are really close and it's a really quiet environment. You can barely feel them. The whole thing is just mushy. You can kind of feel the snap. It's just a little vibration that goes through your fingers. And of course you can see it on the turret, but you can never be quite sure that you're locked in where you need to be. For me, that's not such a huge deal. My fingers are pretty sensitive, so I can feel when it does snap. And I can always, you know, visually verify where things are on these caps, but it is kind of a problem. The reticle itself is rather clear. I like it a lot. It's a glass-etched reticle, and like I was mentioning before, it has the half mil hashes on it. And on the vertical down, when you're adjusting for elevation, you get every other number. So like you get 2 to indicate where your second milliradian hash is, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. And that's as far as that goes. But I gotta say that's really handy, because when you're dealing with the half hashes, counting those up can get a little bit weird. If you had to take a quick shot, it would just be nice to have those numbers there to remind you of where things are, instead of having to go through and count and then multiply by 2, figure out where you are. The accuracy of the reticle is quite good. You can see these silhouette animals that I'm shooting just using the hash marks on the reticle. There's almost no wind today. It's almost imperceptible, and which is actually kind of weird for Oklahoma. I was kind of expecting to have to deal with a little bit more windage today, but I just pretty much put the reticle right on the hash mark where I needed, and then pop, hit them. It works pretty darn good. Some of the features of this scope would seem to add up to it not being a very good varminting scope. For one thing, it only has a maximum power of 14x, and its reticle is first focal plane, so you can't really get that fine view like you would in a second focal plane, where if you zoomed all the way in, you're not looking at 1 milliradian anymore. You might be looking at a 1/4 milliradian or something like that. However, I can say that I'm really happy with it. I took it out for a varminting excursion last year, and yeah, I was just really pleased with how it performed. The fact that it has the extra graduations for the half mil in windage and elevation, that I think is what kind of saves it as a varminting scope. For me, it still worked. It was great. I was able to range the varmints appropriately, and I was able to hold over and take my shots that way instead of having to adjust the turrets, and it really just worked great. Not quite as good as say a high power second focal plane reticle. I can be a bit more precise with that, but out to 300 yards it wasn't a problem at all. One of the reasons that I chose this particular blend of zoom ratio and reticle, and the fact that it's in the first focal plane, is so that I can easily range larger targets, such as, you know, if I wanted to take deer with it, it'd be a little bit easier. I wouldn't have to, you know, try to recalculate things if I had to change the zoom ratio. Some of the other large targets you saw me shooting at today, this works very well for the human torso targets. It's super easy to range, because for me, looking through the reticle, you can probably see here that I have 1 mil from shoulder to shoulder. A man has shoulders that are roughly 26 inches apart, and I know from my little chart that if I just look through and I see shoulders filling 1 full mil of elevation, or excuse me, of windage, then I know that this target is at 600 yards. My overall impression of this scope is quite good. I'll go through some of the bad stuff first. First, you know, as I mentioned, all the little dials, all the turrets and all that, they're all kind of mushy, indistinct, kind of difficult to turn. It's not something you would expect from a high-dollar rifle scope. As far as heaviness goes, the whole thing overall is quite heavy, and that's a little bit of a turn-off, especially if you want to stand and shoot with something like this. I'm sure you could do it, but it's pretty heavy, and it puts a lot of that weight further forward on an AR than you'd like. The warranty isn't super awesome. It's a what the British call a limited lifetime warranty, which means that you got 10 years on it, and you probably have to ship it all the way back to England in order to get it serviced or replaced or whatever, and that's not going to be cheap. But some of the good stuff, it does seem to have pretty good build quality. Even if the turret feel isn't precise, the function of it really is. It's easy to use the hashes, they're accurate. You can use the turrets, they're accurate. You know, supposedly it's waterproof. I haven't dunked this thing to see if that works, but it has really good features, of course, as I've shown you. You know, the ability to have a first focal plane reticle in something that costs less than 2,000 bucks. It really is just fantastic. Great bang for the buck. So I actually would recommend this. If you're concerned about, I guess, the name of it, how well it's going to resell, and what people are going to think of you at the range for having it, you know, it's not a show-off piece. It's not something that is going to have probably massive resale value, but its value is in what it does, and I really respect that. I like it.